Violence, sex, and greed. These three words sum up American Psycho, Bret Easton Ellis's disturbing novel about Patrick Bateman, a New York yuppie who moonlights as a serial killer. From feeding people urinal cakes dipped in chocolate to killing puppies in the Hamptons, the grotesque actions depicted in the novel caused a national uproar upon its release, and it's still one of the most banned books of all time. Likewise, the film version starring Christian Bale nearly received an NC-17 rating due to how violent it was. Keeping all of this in mind, the announcement that they were planning to turn American Psycho into a musical left more than a couple eyebrows raised. This is a story about taking risks, about wanting to stand out while simultaneously wanting to fit in. But above all else, it's a hunt to understand how this musical flop unknowingly helped change Broadway forever. This is the story of American Psycho, the musical. Whenever I wake up, I stand in front of my mirror for precisely 20 seconds, questioning how I became the ravishing man staring back at me. And then I remember Scentbird. Scentbird sends me new fragrances each month, including Dylan Blue Pour Homme by Versace, Leon by Parfum de Marley, Homme Intenso by Vince Camuto, and Eros, also by Versace. And yes, I said all those names correctly. Special thanks to Scentbird for sponsoring this video and helping me find colognes I'd kill for. Make sure to click the link and use my code WAITWINGS for 55% off your first month of Scentbird. That's only about $8 for your first month. I also have exciting news. Scentbird is now available in Canada. Bret Easton Ellis slammed down the remainder of his cocktail, the citrus tang lingering as he looked around at the pack of producers and managers sitting across from him. Everyone looks too young, he thought. The 2008 Los Angeles sun and bamboo umbrellas drew a stark contrast to the gray skies and trash-covered streets he'd grown accustomed to in 1980s New York. Considering he became a best-selling author by the age of 21, meals at upscale restaurants like this one weren't anything new. The cocaine and Klonopin now replaced with gin and lemon water. Today's discussion involved Ellis's novel, American Psycho. Though physically present, Ellis was somewhere else mentally. But then, one of the producers said something that snapped Ellis out of his haze. They wanted to turn the novel into a musical. The story of American Psycho starts in New York, 1987. Initially a straightforward story about Patrick Bateman, a guy leaving the investment company he worked for, the narrative took a dark turn early in the research phase. To better understand what happened in the life of a Wall Street banker, Ellis shadowed a couple of guys who actually worked in the financial district. At one of the last dinners with the group, a tame meal quickly devolved into a cutthroat competition of one-upsmanship. Whose watch was nicer? Who had the better haircut? Who scored reservations to the more exclusive restaurants? As the meal with the Wall Street elites neared its end, Ellis realized that even though he accompanied these guys to a never-ending stream of clubs, restaurants, and lounges, he still didn't know what any of them actually did in their offices for work. That's when he realized something. If Patrick Bateman actually existed, he would totally be a serial killer. Overnight, the relatively calm and grounded story took a dark and surreal turn. Instead of mergers and acquisitions, Bateman became more interested in murders and executions. He morphed into a deadly, unreliable narrator, intended to leave audiences questioning if his grotesque killing sprees were real or just the twisted fantasies of a madman craving attention. In between expensive dinners and cocaine benders, Bret Easton Ellis spent the next 3 years using American Psycho as a way to escape his own reality, while critiquing the privileged world he came from. Due to the backlash before the book's release, the publisher, Simon & Schuster, dropped the title 3 months before its release. And Ellis himself received so many death threats that his new publisher, Vintage, made him agree that his parents couldn't sue if he wound up getting murdered. Upon the book's release in 1991, the critics mutilated American Psycho, and the book failed to secure a single positive reaction from any of the major news outlets. 9 years after the book's release, film director Mary Harron brought American Psycho to the screen and presented a serial killer driven not by mania, but rather by the standard drivers for male aggression: vanity, greed, and ego. 17 years after the book flopped, and 8 years after the movie underperformed, the idea of Patrick Bateman singing and dancing in a musical was one Bret Easton Ellis couldn't wrap his head around. And surveying the producers surrounding him, Ellis knew they were taking a major risk. But for Ellis personally, the risks were practically non-existent. Even if the musical didn't sell a single ticket, he'd still walk away with the money from optioning the rights. And so, he decided to let them roll the dice. At 42,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, the final words of American Psycho hit Duncan Sheik differently than they had back in 1991. The composer was on his way to the Tokyo premiere of his hit musical Spring Awakening, and decided to pass the time rereading the novel. Not long before, an email from Sheik's agent asked if he'd be interested in adapting American Psycho into a musical.
And, I was like, oh, that sounds terrible. I had read the book in college. There was a lot of things in American Psycho that were really disturbing to me. I mean, even beyond the overtly disturbing scenes. I think at that time I was so sort of enmeshed in my own capitalist dreams. Like, you kind of couldn't see the forest for the trees,
20 years later, Sheik held the book in a different light. The commentary on surface-level materialism and the critique of late-stage capitalism served as a relevant allegory for America. But the question still persisted on how to make American Psycho work for the stage. Music plays a prominent role in the novel. The explicit displays of brutality often interrupted by rambling essays on popular 80s musicians. Producers intended for the show to be a jukebox musical, featuring songs by artists mentioned in the book, but Sheik didn't want the show to just be a cheap reproduction of 80s hits. The composer reflected on his New York weekends during college, and the type of music he heard in every club. Each one vibrated with the synth-pop sounds of bands like New Order, Erasure, and Tears for Fears.
I thought, well, this would be really interesting to kind of use electronic dance music, house music, as the sort of aesthetic sound picture for how the songs might, appear on stage. Once those two ideas sort of gelled together, it was like, yeah, let's try and do this.
After Sheik signed on as the composer, producers sent him scriptwriter Roberto Aguirre Sacasa's resume. Aguirre Sacasa's chilling adaptation of The Picture of Dorian Gray, in which he placed the Victorian-era serial killer in 1988 London, inadvertently made him the perfect choice to write American Psycho. So, how does one bring a monster to life on stage? It's a daunting assignment, but not an impossible one. They need to be scary, yet charming. Vile, yet justified. Cold, yet vulnerable. Bret Easton Ellis's novel functions in a two-dimensional, surface-level world. Each character is a soulless robot draped in Paul Stewart and Coco Chanel. In an attempt to add theatrical depth, Aguirre Sacasa positioned the narrative as a story of unrequited love between Patrick Bateman and his secretary, Jean. A minor character in the novel, Jean is the only one to get Patrick to display some form of humanity. Aguirre Sacasa beefed up her presence in the musical and used Jean to create a twisted Beauty and the Beast story. Within no time, Aguirre Sacasa sent a fleshed-out copy of the first act to Duncan Sheik. Sheik stood out from other Broadway composers in the way that he didn't like musicals. His approach to writing musical theater scores was to write songs that didn't sound out of place on an MP3 shuffle. This bled into American Psycho. Inspired by the sounds of synths and drum machines of the 80s, Sheik set out to write musical theater's first entirely electronic score. That's not to say it completely strayed away from tradition, however. From Cole Porter to Jonathan Larson, a staple of Broadway musicals is the list song, which is a song in which people just list things off. As New York Times critic Roger Rosenblatt put in his scathing review of the novel, American Psycho has the most comprehensive lists of baffling luxury items to be found outside airplane gift catalogs. Sheik busted out his collection of 1980s synthesizers to write You Are What You Wear, a song dedicated to rhyming food with clothing items for 3 whole minutes. It took a little less than a year for Sheik and Aguirre Sacasa to deliver an Act 1 first draft. An impressive feat considering the two lived nearly 3,000 miles apart. But that distance looked like nothing once they found their director. The only thing more remarkable than Rupert Gould's directorial work is his hair. His luscious mane accurately paints him as a creative swashbuckler, fueled by creative risk-taking that doesn't always pay off. Gould's nightmarish masterpiece of Macbeth received rave reviews and 6 Tony nominations in 2008. But his 2010 play Enron, a show about the Wall Street collapse of the Texas Energy Company via lightsaber dances and literal velociraptors, flopped hard. Even though he'd never directed a musical before, American Psycho captured Gould's interest. The darker tendencies of the characters and the challenge of presenting disturbing material in a way that didn't turn off commercial interest excited him. Gould joined the project right as Roberto Aguirre Sacasa started writing Act 2, otherwise known as the time when the writer's life became complicated. In 2011, 2 words dominated the headlines.
Spider-Man.
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 The script for the cursed $65 million musical Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark needed saving, and Aguirre Sacasa's mix of theatrical and comic book writing experience made him the perfect man for the job. Another word that dominated the headlines in 2011?
Glee.
At the same time negotiations for the Spider-Man rewrite took place, Aguirre Sacasa got pulled into a secret meeting with television producer Ryan Murphy, and 1 week later, he joined the writing staff on the 3rd season of Glee. The sudden onslaught of major projects made it much more difficult for Aguirre Sacasa to work on American Psycho, a burden that inevitably got handed off to Duncan Sheik. In order to keep the process moving, Act 2 saw the playwright and composer essentially switch positions, with Sheik writing the songs first and Aguirre Sacasa writing the scenes around them. With Gould in London and Aguirre Sacasa in Los Angeles, Sheik trapped himself in his house in upstate New York to work on Act 2 alone.
And I remember feeling like quite isolated up there, trying to write these songs a little bit out of whole cloth without a lot of context to work with beyond the book itself and this outline.
The music in the second act became much darker. Each song grew more grim as Sheik's seclusion from the world mixed with the detached hopelessness of Patrick Bateman.
There's a lot of dark stuff. Well, obviously there's a lot of dark stuff throughout the show, but in particular the second act. So maybe that was as it was meant to be.
A gaggle of producers, actors, and writers gathered to finally workshop a full version of American Psycho the Musical in September 2011. After a few conversations with director Rupert Goold, an up-and-coming actor named Benjamin Walker prepared to read for Patrick Bateman. No stranger to blood, Walker spent the previous 3 years as the title character in Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, an emo rock musical that received fantastic reviews, but failed to bring in people with the means to buy higher-priced tickets, and closed after just 2 months. Still, Walker felt optimistic that things would be different with American Psycho. The optimism extended to the creative team and the other members of the workshop, which included Duncan Sheik's sister, Casey Sheik, and Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark star, Reeve Carney. Benjamin Walker's energy blew the creative team away. So much so that they spent the next 2 years crafting the musical with Walker envisioned as Patrick Bateman. Something that eventually came back to bite them. Everyone involved with American Psycho knew a potential Broadway run depended on getting theater owners to see it out of town. But which city could they send Patrick Bateman to first? Boston? Washington, D.C.? London. They'd send the bastard to England. 30 minutes outside the hustle and bustle of London's West End sits the Almeida Theatre. Built as a Victorian-era lecture hall, the 325-seat venue now exists for one reason: to take risks. In January of 2013, producers David Johnson and Jesse Singer of Act 4 Entertainment announced they would team up with Rupert Goold's Headlong Theatre Company and the Almeida to bring American Psycho to the stage before the end of the year. That's when they ran into a whale of a problem. Their dream Patrick Bateman, Benjamin Walker, couldn't do it. Earlier that same month, he'd been offered a role in the upcoming movie In the Heart of the Sea. Rupert Goold started his hunt for a new Patrick Bateman. He needed to find someone who could pull off being both charming and terrifying. An actor who could bring to life a man detached from reality. An alien. After 3 years of traveling through time and space as the titular Time Lord in Doctor Who, actor Matt Smith decided it was time to hop out of the little blue box and delve into his next adventure. On October 5th, 2013, Matt Smith filmed his final episode of Doctor Who. On October 7th, 2013, he started rehearsals for American Psycho. The first 7 weeks left self-conscious Smith racked with anxiety. This was his first musical, and he was completely out of his element. Off the back of a $150,000 Kickstarter organized by producer Jesse Singer, American Psycho rehearsals in London spanned 7 weeks instead of the traditional 5. For Matt Smith, those 7 weeks were hell. Every day was filled with singing lessons from Duncan Sheik and dance lessons from choreographer Lynn Page. As Smith went through intense training to capture the ripped physique of Patrick Bateman, scenic designer S. Devlin began constructing the world he actually inhabited. One of the things that makes Patrick Bateman terrifying is his apartment. The sterile surroundings serve as a jarring backdrop for his heinous acts. Devlin brought this same off-putting aesthetic into the play with her set design, placing the show in a white box that also included 2 turntables, one on the left and one on the right, and this was meant to mimic the winding spools of a cassette tape in a Sony Walkman. Meanwhile, the barren backdrop served as a canvas for mesmerizing video projections by Finn Ross and ominous lighting by John Clark. Once Duncan Sheik's pulsing electronic score came into the fray, the musical became a cannibalistic carnival. The show slithered towards opening night in London. No one on the team knew what to expect when tickets went on sale. The musical came from a polarizing source material, featured a script written by a Glee writer, an all-electronic score, and Doctor Who wielding an axe in his underwear. Luckily, much like an off-Broadway house in America, the patrons for the Almeida skewed younger and enthusiastically embraced riskier material. American Psycho sold out its entire 5-week run faster than a morning rush at Bloomingdale's. Bret Easton Ellis received an invite to attend opening night in London. The musical always felt distant to the author. So distant, in fact, that he periodically forgot it was even happening. Responding with the same raw attitude that filled the pages of his books, Ellis told producer-singer,
"If you brought me out for the London premiere to walk the red carpet and talk to press, and if I didn't like the show, I was going to be honest." And they decided not to take the risk or the expense.
American Psycho the Musical officially opened at the Almeida Theater on December 12, 2012. The London stage morphed into a New York City club, interrupted by Patrick Bateman emerging from a stand-up tanning bed. No big opening number, just a nearly naked man detailing his morning routine. The next 2 hours played out as a pompous pageant of egos, with many of the scenes directly mirroring the novel and the movie. Dance battles over business cards, cocaine-charged ballads in bathroom stalls, new wave killing sprees with shotguns and chainsaws, Phil Collins. Original songs represented a large amount of the musical score, with a few cover songs from popular 80s artists sprinkled throughout. Whereas the original songs received elaborate electronic backing tracks, nearly all of the covers were presented as a cappella numbers. All except for one. One of the most iconic moments from the movie is Patrick Bateman's jealously fueled murder of fellow stockbroker Paul Owen. A vicious, grisly axe attack made even more unsettling by the Huey Lewis and the News song Hip to Be Square playing underneath. Sheik thought about turning the moment into a musical number, but ultimately nixed the idea. The actual song was just too fun not to use. For the most part, the London production received praise from critics. But the same question kept popping up in each review. Where's the blood? Figuring out how far to push the limits constantly plagued the creative team of American Psycho. On one hand, they wanted to stay true to the source material. On the other, the source material featured extremely racist, sexist, and homophobic speech, a 5-year-old child murdered in a zoo, and a rat eating a woman alive. Out of concern that using fake blood in their serial killer show could be a turnoff for the crowd, the team made the London show entirely bloodless, opting instead to use abstract streaks of red lighting, much to the dismay of critics and audience members alike. Still, no one could deny that American Psycho the Musical exceeded expectations, and soon talks began about taking the show back over to the States. Holding on to their Broadway aspirations, the team recognized that the London production didn't have strong enough reviews to secure a theater on the Great White Way just yet. But what about off-Broadway? They'd get a cheaper venue, an extended period of time to rework the material for a US audience, and it could generate a following from the younger crowds before jumping over to Broadway. To producer David Johnson, the plan seemed perfect, and in July 2014, news outlets announced American Psycho's US debut at Second Stage Theater in New York. Matt Smith decided not to carry on with the role following London, leaving Gould in the lurch yet again. Much to the director's relief, the original choice for Patrick Bateman, Benjamin Walker, came back into the picture, and as luck would have it, his schedule was open for the foreseeable future. Gould leapt at the chance and offered Walker the role. During contract negotiations, a series of secret phone calls and meetings started between David Johnson and the Broadway producing team Jerry Frankel and Jeffrey Richards. The duo behind the Broadway transfer of Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson and Duncan Sheik's Spring Awakening wanted to cash in on bringing American Psycho to Broadway, and Second Stage Theater was in their way. Maneuvering under the theater's radar, Frankel and Richards tempted Johnson to just use the off-Broadway funds to take the show directly to Broadway for the 2015 to 2016 season. As the nonprofit Second Stage Theater started hyping up the US premiere of American Psycho for their season, David Johnson revoked the rights from them without warning. Jumping straight to Broadway was a super risky proposition, especially considering the competition of the season. Lin-Manuel Miranda's new musical Hamilton premiered at the Richard Rodgers Theater in August 2015 and completely flipped the theater world on its head. American Psycho wasn't just going up against another musical. It was going up against a cultural phenomenon. The windowless walls and industrial vibe of the Duke contrasted the magnificent New York City views of the new 42 studios directly above. American Psycho needed a makeover, and for the next 5 weeks, this was their laboratory.
We kind of went to a black hole every day to create, which was really cool. It created this environment where we could do weird stuff just to make a mess of things and kind of see where you are at the end of the day, you know?
For New York, the team wanted the show to feel like a true horror experience. And in order to achieve that, they needed more blood. A lot more. During the first week of Broadway rehearsals, a few of the cast members huddled together in hazmat suits as they got sprayed with various mixtures of fake blood. In the original novel, the first 100 pages or so are relatively calm. As the book progresses, Bateman becomes more unhinged. The final 100 pages are a horrifying bloodbath. The musical mimicked this. The first major instance of blood didn't show up until the murder of fellow Wall Street yuppie Paul Owen at the end of Act 1. The reserved artistic approach in London morphed into an all-out massacre in New York.
So there were 3 blood cannons, either side of the chair, and then one in the center of the chair, like facing the audience, basically. He went and he pressed a button, brought the screen down, which is so in the vein of Patrick Bateman, like protect the walls, protect the floor, right? This pristine world. And it's like, press a button, alert a machine engages, then shoots the cannon. So they go, button, boom, you know, so that the cannon, as soon as it hits me, the cannon goes off and shoots the back of the head out. Oh my God, that reminds me, I think one of them shot early. I think people got sprayed one night because I think one of them went off early.
One of the cannons accidentally went off early and it had blood in it and they didn't have the tarps down. So it got on us, and like got on our shirt, which was horrible. We learned pretty quickly you had to keep it separate. If it was of value and it could die, you kind of kept it away from the blood.
The bloody second act culminated in a crimson carnage as Bateman unleashed his newfound wrath on the nameless drones, leaving them in a bloody pile. In rehearsals, choreographer Lynn Page called this moment the Rat King. If a colony of rats gets stuck in a tiny space for a long period of time, their tails become intertwined into a giant knot. Unable to separate their tails, the rats roll around in one nightmarish heap. After his murder spree in the song I Am Back, Bateman delivered a chilling monologue. Behind him, the dead ensemble members rolled together as one giant, blood-covered Rat King. In addition to the increased cranapple juice on stage, the score received an overhaul too. Chic always felt that the first 15 minutes of the musical really suffered without a big opening number to kick things off. Off the back of Chic's 2015 album, Legerdemain, Rupert Gould noticed that the lead track, Selling Out, held a lot of the same values and sounds as American Psycho. As the show rolled into New York, Chic refined the song to feel rough enough, cool enough, and sexy enough to become the musical's new opening number. After this final victory, things went south. Fast. American Psycho's unique electronic sound came from all the pre-recorded tracks that played over the theater speakers coming from a single laptop. The software allowed Chic to distort and transform the sounds in a way that he couldn't do with real instruments. This worked fine in London, but in New York, the unions held much stricter guidelines and required American Psycho to have at least 4 live musicians for the show. Suddenly, Chic needed to figure out how to incorporate real instruments into his all-electronic score. Then there was the problem of the show's length. Clocking in at nearly 3 hours, the musical version of American Psycho nearly doubled the length of the film. Part of the reason stemmed from the inclusion of book scenes not included in the movie, like a trip to the Hamptons and an entire song for Patrick Bateman's mom. They desperately needed to make cuts to the script, and playwright Roberto Aguirre Sacasa could only attend rehearsals via Skype, as he got ready to film the pilot for a new show called Riverdale. They could nix the Hamptons scene, but then the big I Am Back murder scene wouldn't make any sense. Likewise, they could cut Patrick's mother's song, but that also meant cutting Tony winner Alice Ripley's only number. The songs and scenes for Act 2 were more intertwined than a colony of rats in a London sewer. And with a scriptwriter stuck in Vancouver, a composer frantically trying to adapt an all-electronic score, and very little time to make any changes, few major cuts ever materialized. Adding to the frenzy, by the time preview started, the increased blood flow became a bloody mess. The ruby red corn syrup periodically wound up on the clothes and purses of audience members in the front row. Evil Dead the Musical encountered a similar problem in 2007 and created something called the Splatter Zone, charging premium prices for a section of seats specifically designed to leave audiences drenched in blood. For a brief moment, American Psycho the Musical considered taking the same approach. But instead of embracing the mess, producers went to the other extreme, eliminating roughly 90% of the blood in the show by the end of previews. The move confused a majority of the cast and creative team. After spending 5 weeks creating an exhilarating horror musical more in tune with Bret Easton Ellis's novel, producers were now telling them to tone down the fright in hopes of making American Psycho more family-friendly. The killing spree began on April 21st, 2016. Bruised, but less bloody, the cast of American Psycho took to the stage for opening night at the Schoenfeld Theater. The red carpet resembled a fashion show more than a Broadway musical. Bobby Flay did an interview with Broadway Style Guide, and Bret Easton Ellis tried taking photos on an iPhone 6. Finally accepting the invitation, the author watched the show in previews. To the surprise of many, he thoroughly enjoyed it and spent the entire opening week promoting the show. Spirits were high, and the reception from the crowd continued that trend. Meanwhile, a printing plant across the East River rapidly spat out thousands of copies for Friday's issue of the New York Times. The review mercilessly pounded the show into the asphalt. The words terminally undecided tone and condescending nostalgia wrapped their hands around his throat, while the phrase American Psycho is a mess sliced through any mistaken optimism. Later that day, a vulture circled the mangled carcass of a musical. Picking through the remains, critic Jesse Green called out specific narrative flaws, such as Jean, Patrick's mother, and an overall failure to humanize the characters. The precision of Green's scalpel-like dissection hurt even more than the broad swings supplied by others, especially for Duncan Sheik, who read every review. The mutilation continued with the box office receipts. American Psycho's first week only brought in half of the Schoenfeld's $1 million ticket capacity. The low sales numbers perplexed producers because the show played packed houses. That's when they realized who filled the seats. American Psycho's average ticket price came in lower than other Broadway shows during this time, as a way to get younger people into the theater, and to rope in people who wanted to see a Broadway show but couldn't afford Hamilton. To an extent, the musical achieved both. The negative reviews didn't deter the younger audiences, but the younger audiences knew how to score cheaper, discounted tickets. Now American Psycho faced a conundrum. They couldn't raise prices because they would lose the younger crowds and sell a lot less seats, but if they kept prices low, they would never bring in enough to be profitable or pay off the massive debt they'd incurred from bringing the show over from Europe. Additionally, the musical neither appealed to the older generation it made fun of, nor the tourists on vacation with their families. No matter which way the producers cut it, it was a lose-lose-lose situation. Producers continuously told the cast not to worry, as rumors of closing swirled backstage. With the Tony Awards fast approaching, they hoped that a few trophies or nominations could help them stay afloat. Andrew Rannells and Nikki M. James rattled off the nominees, and within seconds, the two started to sound like a skipping CD. 8 minutes later, American Psycho received only 2 nominations in minor categories for scenic and lighting design. On a bright May day, assembled backstage before the cast and crew, producers announced that American Psycho would close on June 5th, 2016. According to a few actors involved with the production, halfway through the meeting, a panting and frustrated Duncan Sheik walked in. He biked across town to be there. Allegedly, this was the first time he heard that the show was closing. Sheik and a few others wanted to hold on for just a little bit longer, but producers were more concerned with pleasing the investors, and the ticket sales didn't look good. The next 10 days morphed into a funeral dirge. Rupert Gould returned to the Almeida as their new artistic director. Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa's Riverdale got picked up for a full season. Duncan Sheik planned to record a Broadway cast album to preserve the show, much like he did with London. He and the cast even recorded a few demos in his apartment to prepare. But now knowing that the show wouldn't recoup, no one would foot the bill. Hurt, disappointed, and ready to move on, Duncan Sheik disappeared. On June 5th, American Psycho the Musical slayed its final victim, after 27 previews and just 54 performances. Over 13 million people attended a Broadway show in the 2015 to 2016 season, and many actively chose to see something other than American Psycho. The entire concept, execution, and fan base for American Psycho didn't fit within the confines of the commercial Broadway landscape at the time, and as such, it wasn't sustainable. But it achieved something that not a lot of musicals could. It finally got younger people interested in musical theater. It could be argued that a major shift started in the mid-2010s, as a war waged between a desire to make Broadway more accessible to younger audiences while also fighting a financial necessity to cater to the older, more affluent crowds. Part of the reason Hamilton succeeded was because it found the middle ground by mixing rap and traditional musical theater structure to appeal to both audiences. Lin-Manuel Miranda was able to do what Duncan Sheik did back in 2006, and made musical theater songs that didn't sound like musical theater songs. But to its credit, so did American Psycho. Psycho sought to be the anti-musical. 2 hours of synth pop and bloody goodness that Broadway obviously wasn't ready for. But honestly, doesn't that stay true to the history of American Psycho as a whole? A story consistently ahead of its time. Seeing how the book and the movie transcended from flop to classic and gathered a die-hard cult following, could it be that the same thing might happen inevitably with the musical?
Here's the good news is that I'm really proud of it. It feels like the cool kids did get it in the way that they were meant to, and that gives me a good feeling. So,
if anything, American Psycho the musical definitely proved it's hip to be square.
My name is Duncan Sheik. My new record, Claptrap, comes out August 26th on Anti-Fragile Records. And go check it out wherever you check out music.